Welcome back, everyone. Thank you for all of those who have stayed on Zoom as well for this panel. We're going to move on to our final panel for the day. This is the panel on language and politics. Sorry, can I have everyone's attention, please? We're going to start on time now. Is everyone here and settled in? Thank you. I'm going to invite our chair up on stage now. So our chair for the day is Dr. Kusha Anand, who is an associate lecturer and master dissertation lead at the UCL Institute of Education. As an international policy sociologist, she specializes in researching education reforms in India. She has recently published 3 books, Teaching India-Pakistan Relations, Delhi's Education Revolution, and Bridging Neoliberalism and Hindu Nationalism. Her research findings have been shared with policymakers and parliamentarians in the UK. Additionally, she has contributed to interdisciplinary research projects focusing on minorities, refugees, and migrants in the UK. Thank you for being with us, Kusha, and I'll hand over to you now.
Thank you, Moini, and thank you, Uma, for inviting me to chair this brilliant panel on language and politics. And I think it's very close to my work as well. As you can see, some of my colleagues, my reviewers are also sitting here, reviews of my book. Thank you for being there. Unfortunately, we don't have our first presenter, so they sent apologies. So Dr. Lara Ibn Niyaz won't be presenting today. She was supposed to present on linguistic homogeneity, national building, and the others. Evidence from the textbook in India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh. But we'll stick to the time. We still have 3 presenters. We give them 15 minutes each. After each presentation, we'll have a bit of discussion about their papers. We'll collect questions. We'll ask them to answer you, and then we'll close for the day. So can I invite Juno Michael Alphonse from University of Oxford. Juno is reading the MSc in Education at the University of Oxford in 2023. She has worked in various non-government organizations across India towards empowering women and children through education. Her overarching aspiration is to work towards equity and diversity within education and society through radical inclusivity and kindness. And she will be speaking on the role of education in the death of vernaculars in India. Thank you, Juno.
Okay, am I audible? Okay, cool. Thank you for those wonderful words, and that was very kind of you. Am I audible? Okay. I love how even if you're offline or online, that is a question you keep asking. Hello. Hello. Okay. I'm sorry. Okay, hi. So my name is Juno Felicia Michael, and I will be looking into the role of education in death of vernacular languages in India. So it starts off with a quote by Federico Fellini, which says, "A different language results in a different version of life." And that basically symbolizes that language is not just a symbol. It is also a way of marking your culture, your history, and your existence within time and society. And when there is a death of a language, the language is not the only thing that dies, but also the heritage and history of people. And here I would like to quote a poem, a line in the poem, Buffalo Dusk by Carl Sandburg, that says, "Those who saw the buffaloes are gone, and the buffaloes are gone." These lines by Carl Sandburg showcases the systemic erasure of indigenous history in America. He basically uses dusk as a symbol to portray how dusk propels light away. Equivalently, system usually gradually drives indigenous people's history away using systemic erasure of their identity markers such as languages. And again, there is this beautiful quote by Churchill that says, "Victors write history." But I would like to question, who are these victors? And why are they the ones who are the victors? And what gives them the power to be the victors? And this is where my identity as a person came in, which is basically from this tiny little village in India. And I did not really have a good understanding of my own culture. And I wanted to know why. And I started to dig in deeper to kind of understand my relationship with my culture, which promoted my understanding of the language I was born into. And then kind of learning how education as a system kind of helped the erasure. I wouldn't completely blame it. It was also a lot on me and being, moved into an urban society, propelled into a different culture. But we will move into that. So this paper is sort of a look at education as a tool of erasure and how it can be used as a tool of propagation as well by many to basically teach a certain kind of history and to teach that some languages are better than the other, not in an overt way, but through covert hidden curriculums. So we are looking at how education as a system is not only a medium of teaching a child to be a contributing member of society, but to also have this understanding of political views that are considered right by the normative society and the hegemonic dominant groups, right? So schooling and education thus becomes a robust and deliberate platform for nation building. And this obviously means that though as a nation, India is seen to celebrate plurality and heterogeneity, systemically, it sort of aims towards a collective identity and nationalism and homogeneity. And therefore, through this systemic assimilation towards homogeneity, few languages prevail over others. And I wanted to look into what languages prevail over others and why do they prevail over others, and how the education system assists that, right? So for that, I used interpretative and critical discourse approach because I felt that that would help me understand the core reasons behind it better. And I wanted to maybe not delve into it in like a particular space or time, but more so in like a brief understanding in an overarching manner. And I got to look at it from two different perspectives, which was vernacular being the victim of development and the other being the othering of subaltern vernaculars. So vernacular being the victim of development obviously is something that we have seen over the course of this amazing conference in different ways and manners where they were discussing identities, right? So English language is seen both as a way of continue. Yeah, I can do that. Yeah. The mic helps. Anyways, so as I was saying, English is seen as both a medium that helps people become empowered, but it's also seen as a medium that can be, othering because of the quality of language education that they receive. So English is seen as a critical requirement within economic growth and the cash economy of capitalism. And the proficiency of English language also showcases the high social stature and intellectual abilities. So, as the economy develops and thrives, the need for vernacular languages, especially subaltern vernacular languages that do not have a script, diminishes. And as they do not seem required, a lot of people sort of stop using it altogether. And this is something that we've been seeing over a very long period of time. And therefore, competency in English and competency in national languages are preferred over languages that do not have a script. And because also capitalism tells you if it doesn't have a use and you cannot use it to become better, stop learning it altogether. Right? So that has sort of become the reason why a lot of languages of marginalized communities have either become endangered or died altogether. And even though cultural democracy is an ideal upheld within our current society, systemically, especially within the education system, it's not practically applied. So, one, the lack of opportunities. Two, the hierarchical order of English, national languages, and then whatever sort of comes into play into propagating the history and also the contemporary nature of Indian civil society. So you start losing out on your language roots, which also starts making you lose out on your history of ancestral language roots. And now you sort of become more state dependent on your history. And then if you become more like urbanized, you become more Indian, you know, history based. So it's sort of that way, it propagates nationalism and this homogeneous identity building. And then we come, of course, at the othering of subaltern vernaculars. I think this was also sort of covered in a lot of papers which were in the conference, which spoke about how systemic erasure of language and the misrepresentation of indigenous knowledge has been a cause of global resistance. A lot of indigenous communities are now coming forward and saying, hey, my system of knowledge, my system of language, and my system of belief should also be represented within the academic space. And we are also seeing this as a Dalit movement within India. We are seeing this from people who are from scheduled castes, scheduled tribes, and other backward castes. And this requirement towards, pushing their narrative is very important, because in the current academic space, knowledge is seen as a tool of empowerment and liberation, but those within the margins are not allowed to access them by those within the hegemonic civil society, which means there is a dichotomy now. You either use the language of the hegemonic social order, or you do not get to play out your narrative. There is no space for them to basically speak their truth in their own languages. And this crisis has been identified by UNESCO, and there are national policies that are trying to work towards it. But then again, two questions arise, right? One is, even though it talks about having like the national education policy talks about including mother tongue till 5th grade. What are these mother tongues? Which are these mother tongues? There is a nationalization of these languages and only those are used. What about the dialects of various regions? What about languages within regions that do not have, scripts? So what about those that cannot be recognized as common languages? What about those languages? And secondly, there is this inclusion of tribal culture, but this inclusion sort of comes from a few aspects of tribal culture and not the culture of the tribal people itself. And this is often not from the people who belong to various tribes, but rather, what's being studied about them that's being included within these knowledge systems. So even though frameworks exist, that is the second point. This is the second point, sorry. Even though frameworks exist, the major problem is people are not ready to accept, right? There are a lot of policies that exist. There are a lot of ways of trying to include these like marginalized indigenous communities, languages within and history that, knowledge within like mainstream academia. But there is this othering that is caused by the prevalent civil society. And those who are within these civil societies often do look down upon languages that are not English, that are not national languages. So it is not just recognition, but also the fact that they need to be accepted as equals. And also they shouldn't be accepted, not just accepted, but also heard as people who are equals of all. Right? So basically, I'd like to conclude by saying that language is a foundation for developing a social world and helps us form large cultural beliefs and ideologies. It's also required that the educational system works with sustaining and strengthening the existence of native languages as they're an essential part of the nation's historical narrative and cultural identity. We can't just keep saying unity in diversity, but also portrayed within our various social orders. Thank you.
Thank you, Juno, for a brilliant presentation and being on time, before time actually. Can I request our next presenter, Manisha Badran from University of Hyderabad, India. And her title for the presentation is Gender Sensitization in School Beyond the Gender Neutral Address. And Manisha Badran is a PhD student at the Department of English, University of Hyderabad, India. studying human rights questions in contemporary West Asian war fiction. Her MPhil thesis was to subject gendered bodies and the Indian Penal Code. She completed her post-graduation in English literature from the English and Foreign Languages University, Hyderabad. Her research interests include women's studies, human rights, and Indian criminal law. Thank you, Manisha.
Can you hear me? Thank you. The topic of my presentation today is gender sensitization in schools beyond the gender neutral address. So I come from the state of Kerala, which is in southern India. And recently, in January 2023, a directive was issued by the government of Kerala, stating that teachers in schools should henceforth be addressed only by the gender neutral term teacher and no longer as sir or ma'am. So it got me thinking, so how will it work out? So although the elimination of the dyad of sir or ma'am is also is the elimination of the gender binary addresses, I think the directive is also fraught with some challenges of implementation. So in this presentation, I look at what these challenges may be and how gender inclusive addresses might be a more feasible and actually a more inclusive option to implement in schools. So for this presentation, I extend the theories proposed by Ana Maria del Gonzalez, Lars Zeman, and Elizabeth Morrish. So since teacher is an occupational title, like air hostess or chairman, the idea that it should always be gender neutral from now on brought to mind those terms, how air hostess was replaced and how chairman was replaced. But then it got me thinking the teacher is already gender neutral. It is already a gender neutral term. So what are they trying to establish? What is the government looking forward to do? So it is just about the address. The title, the occupational title is already gender neutral. So henceforth, the address has also should be gender neutral, no longer so. But again, the practicality of it, how do you always address the teacher as just teacher in class without anything else? Maybe for the Indian culture where you cannot address the teacher by name because there is this system of you must respect the elders and not call them by name. It would be very disrespectful to call them by their first name. So that's probably why. And also a tidbit of cultural specificity, which is very interesting. In Kerala, the term teacher is used only usually to refer to female teachers. So it's instead of sir and ma'am, it's always sir and teacher. So some memes were coming up about how this was causing confusion. Somebody would say, I'm staying with the teacher today. A man would say, I'm staying with the teacher today to his wife. And she would freak out. I mean, it's very heteronormative, but even then, those memes were coming up after this law. And but that poses an interesting subversion in Kerala, at least for the people of Kerala, I feel, because usually actor was used formally to refer to male actors. And that male term, masculine noun, was expanded to incorporate female and non-binary actors later. But here, a female or feminine noun, at least as far as Keralites are concerned, is now being expanded to incorporate people of all genders. So there's a certain subversion happening through this law, I feel, directive. Again, how this will be implemented. In a classroom, especially a language classroom, I was thinking there's a lot of interaction between the teacher and the student. So how would you always refer to them as teacher and just the second person pronoun you? There would be a moment where you would have to address them using another pronoun. So linguist Lars, even if I may quote, he insists that I quote, unless the speaker goes to lengths to avoid using a pronoun in reference to someone, they will eventually be faced with a choice about which pronouns to use. Unquote. And here I would also like to think about Althusserian interpolation and something similar that Judith Butler has also proposed, where she says, I quote, in some way, we come to exist, as it were, in the moment of being addressed, and something about our existence proves precarious when that address fails. Something about our existence proves precarious when that address fails. So if we come to exist only in the moment of address, if the address is continuously and gender neutral, how do we exist as gendered beings in a classroom, as gender teachers, and who are navigating a patriarchal society, and everybody is going through those experiences in their real lives. So how would you? So there is a work by Elizabeth Morish. She has written on how her lesbian identity had to be concealed a little bit, but she wanted to reveal it as well. So how she navigated it in the classroom. She is a professor. And in that context, she says, how can we be a lesbian in a context in which the lesbian does not exist? So I wanted to extend this question to the classroom and to Kerala's directive and ask, how can a person be gendered in the context where gender must remain neutral? While the use of the gender neutral pronoun avoids the misgendering of a person whose preferred pronouns are unknown to the speaker, in the context of a classroom where there is an extended period of familiarity, it is not practicable. And also, Professor Ana Maria del Rayo Gonzalez suggests that bundling those who have had to fight quite literally for their right to define their own gender identity into a genderless category or they is a microaggression. They've had to fight to be finally addressed as he, him, or she, her. And now finally to again group them as they and continuously address them as they is a microaggression, she says. Against the backdrop of these questions, I feel that the directive falls short and it preempts a gender-just form of interpellation. The interpellation is preempted by this directive when we are all addressed as they. While gender-neutral occupational titles might be practicable, gender-neutral addresses raises questions of feasibility and appropriateness of interpellation. And I feel that an insistence on gender neutrality could also mean that you cannot refer to a person by Mr., Miss, or Mix. Even though that is gender inclusive, it would still remain gendered, and not gender neutral. So that would also be preempted by this directive. And if you extend it to its logical extreme, it might also mean that some names cannot be used because my name is culturally gendered, for instance, that as far as I don't know, masculine, born and named, identified at birth as masculine and named Manisha. So what if there comes a time, if this is extended to its logical extreme, what if all names have to be gender neutral because your gendered identity cannot be revealed or discussed or even talked about in the classroom? So I don't feel that it is a practicable solution. And also, even if you somehow establish it in the classroom, when children go home, there is father and mother, brother and sister, uncles and aunts. So what kind of gender sensitization are we actually establishing if that is the intention of the government? Drawing on the work of Zimmern and Del Rayo Gonzalez, I argue that as opposed to in addition to gender neutrality, gender inclusivity presents a more pragmatic solution for execution in the classroom and is more embracing of the gender spectrum. Professor Rayo Gonzalez states that while gender neutrality, I quote, completely erases gender from a gendered language, thereby exacerbating the invisibility of gender diversity, gender inclusivity, on the other hand, explicitly decenters the gender binary and increases the visibility of gender diversity, unquote. Using this directive as a point of directive of the Kerala government as a point of departure and also drawing upon the theories by Lal Zimmern, I would like to propose certain ways in which this can actually be discussed in the classroom. So although 5 months have passed since the directive was issued and the new academic year has started in June, I inquired and things are just the same. Everybody's being addressed as man, which means that there are certain limitations to how it can be executed. So Zimin, in a different context, proposes that a gender-sensitized crowd would introduce themselves with their name and followed by their pronouns. So I felt that when teachers and students interact, maybe if we are looking forward to a gender-sensitized classroom, teachers could simply introduce themselves with their names and their pronouns, preferred pronouns, so that there is a certain idea that students, that it's imbibed that one person's physical appearance does not state their pronoun, not state whether they're male or female, but it has to be spoken about. They have to like declare their pronouns, and only then may you address them. So, and students will also be encouraged to state their pronouns if they are comfortable doing so. So if those simple, it's just to basically imbibe the idea. And similarly, Zimin also rewrites certain sentences to show how gender inclusive language can be generally very gendered and binary sentences can actually be rewritten to encompass all genders. So I felt that if you take a student's handbook given by the school, everything is extremely gendered. Like girls have to braid their hair on both sides and boys have to cut their hair short. My niece was complaining that in her school, boys get to play basketball and girls can play only volleyball. So everything is gendered in schools. So I thought that instead of these challenges that kids come across, instead of dealing with them or trying to conquer them as challenges, these sentences that they come across, these realities that they encounter, can actually be used as material to actually teach them gender inclusive language. So they can be made to rewrite these sentences, for instance, and all students with long hair must wear their hair in braids on both sides, can be a more inclusive way of stating it. So these, I feel like if you extend Zimin's arguments into these school handbooks, it would be a better way of actually implementing this law instead of fixing on gender neutrality and calling everybody teacher and student. So that's pretty much it. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Manisha. I don't know if I'm chairing. Okay, everybody's on time or before time. So thank you, everyone. Moving on to our last presenter, Mohini Gupta from University of Oxford. Mohini Gupta is default candidate at the Faculty of Asian and Middle Eastern Studies at University of Oxford. She has been the Charles Wallace India Trust Translator, Writer Fellow in 2017. She has co-edited Rethinking Education in the Context of Post-Pandemic South Asia, Challenges and Possibilities with Routledge in 2023. And the Hindu Bard, the poetry of Dorothy Banerjee with Kono Press in 2023. She co-convenes the Education South Asia project along with Dr. Uma Pradhan. Can I please request Mohini?
Thank you so much. I'll just get my PPT going. Okay, can everyone hear me? Great. So thank you so much. I understand the disadvantages of being the absolutely last presenter. So thank you for staying on. We will wrap up after this one. But good evening. I'm going to present a small bit of my DPhil research today. The title of my presentation is Erased Curriculum, Language Textbooks at the Site of Conflict in India. My broader DPhil research is around the impact of language policy, curriculum, and teaching practices in India on the attitudes of young students towards their languages. This is within a very urban context of New Delhi. We've already heard a lot of these debates already happening through the day around language and policy, language and curriculum, so you might find some repetitions. But yeah. So the concept that I'm talking about is erased curriculum, and I think Juno already referred to some sort of erasures in textbooks and curriculums. We already had Nilesh talking about textbooks, we had Shivani talking about the policy, so I will be sort of bringing some of those things into my presentation as well. I just wanted to sort of situate my research within this sort of social linguistics research on language ideologies in education. Language ideologies, by definition, are any sets of beliefs about language that are articulated by its users. So this could be language and language in class, language in caste, language in education, language in policy, nationalism, multilingualism. It covers a host of topics within that are associated with language. And educational institutions become a really key site for reproducing language ideologies. So Michael Apple, an educational theorist, has called education a site of conflict about the kind of knowledge that is and should be taught. So I use that term in my title. And I'm focusing particularly on textbooks, which I feel are the most tangible manifestation of language policy at the national central level, which then feeds directly into reproducing these language ideologies within the walls of the classroom. Just to talk a little bit about the connections between curriculum and ideology, the curriculum of a school sort of includes textbooks, syllabi, assessment and examination structures, sports, dance, music, physical education, as well as teaching and learning practices. That's the sort of distinction between textbooks and curriculum. So textbook is only one part of the larger curriculum. And textbook creation, I argue, sort of becomes an important form of gatekeeping as well as a tool to educate. And it's an extremely relevant topic even until today. Some of you might have heard that 2 months ago, there was something called a syllabus rationalization by the National Council of Educational Research and Training, the NCRT in India, which led to the removal of chapters on Mughal rulers in the class 12 history textbook. And there was a huge uproar around this. But at the same time also praised by some members of the incumbent government who, whose political agenda it has been to kind of remove the influence of Mughal rulers. If you think of sort of road or name-changing convention with relation to roads or cities, it's already sort of been going on, so it really fits into that agenda. So this new term of syllabus rationalization is something that NCRT has come up with after the pandemic, where they're ostensibly removing certain chapters from textbooks to reduce the academic load on students. So they feel that there's been a lot of learning gaps in the pandemic and they want to reduce the load on students. So they remove chapters, but within that erasure, there's something else that goes on as well. So that's the erasure that I want to focus on. I think again, Juno, you referred to hidden curriculum, which is a concept in education, which sort of looks at the ideology that is hidden or entrenched within the curriculum beyond the stated goals and aims of a textbook. So this could include sort of subtle messaging included in the textbook. It could also include how teachers deliver that textbook in the classroom, the kind of statements they make, the ideologies that these end up conveying through chapters. So I'm building on that hidden curriculum concept and sort of expanding it to talk about erased curriculum in language textbooks, which actually looks at over the years which chapters have been erased from textbooks, and also more importantly, which chapters have remained. And when you look at which chapters have remained in conjunction with what's been removed, it sort of becomes even more telling. So the research questions that I'm looking at today are what does this erased or now it's something that is euphemized as rationalized curriculum, what does it say about political and social motives of textbook creators? I will be focusing on Hindi language textbooks in particular. So I will talk about why it matters. Why should we look at particularly Hindi language textbooks? And then who is included and excluded from the narrative when we look at these chapters that have remained. The methodology that I've used is document analysis. So I've analyzed a set of Hindi textbooks, mostly class 5 to class 8, but I look at some other examples as well. And I've conducted some interviews with Hindi teachers from private English medium and Hindi medium schools in New Delhi. The interviews don't feature so much in this presentation, but it has informed a lot of my research on the textbooks as well. I just want to broadly contextualize textbook culture in India. Krishna Kumar, who was heading NCERT for many years, he's a very well-known academic. He has described this textbook culture in India, which says that, which makes us believe the knowledge of the textbook is the only sort of legitimate or legitimized knowledge. And Indian schools actually consider the textbook to be the entire curriculum. So we talked about the differences between curriculum and textbook, but actually sometimes it is treated as the only curriculum. There'll be times where that book will be the only book that students will read in that language. So there's a really huge, high value that's placed on the printed word in educational institutes. There's a really interesting study by Amina Muhammad Arif, who's looked at history textbooks in both India and Pakistan, and she talks about education systems as key channels to manufacturing national identity and citizenship. And she talks about this focus on indigenization and this sense of going back to a golden past in educational curriculum changes in India and Pakistan. So she's tracing it in history, but if you look at the national education policy, which again Shivani was talking about earlier, there is this sense still remains about this kind of going back to this perfect past, which we need to bring back, and talking about older languages and cultures. She also quotes this example of how in 1999, BJP Minister Murli Manohar Joshi had talked about the Indianization, nationalization, and spiritualization of Indian school education by removing the 3 M's, which are Macaulay, Marx, and Madrasa. So this was, I just want to sort of contextualize this within the Indian setting. And why I'm looking at language textbooks in my research is because there are a lot of there's a lot of academic work on history textbooks already in South Asia. And they come into focus a lot with how every government that comes in changes the history of the nation. So history textbooks get a lot of attention in that sense, in terms of what happens, what gets erased, what comes in. But language textbooks are not paid that much attention to, and language really is one of the greatest forces of socialization, as Edward Sapir says. And language socialization is a particular area that looks at how young people are socialized into and through language. So they're socialized into the language, you're learning the grammar and the sort of structure of the language, but at the same time, through that language, you're learning certain values and ideals that you're meant to be socialized into. So language then plays a huge role in that. It not only reflects, but also reinforces values for students. And in that sense, it helps in constructing a social reality for students. So in this sense, language curriculum becomes a really important part of the socialization process in schools. I'm just going to give you a small slice of this sort of erased curriculum, and I won't take too long. But in terms of what gets erased and what remains, when I was talking to teachers in schools, I was asking them about erased chapters, and I was also looking at it from the point of view of what do students find interesting, what do they engage with, what do they feel alienated from. So one of the chapters that a lot of teachers brought up was actually called Hamid Khan. This was a Hindi chapter called Hamid Khan by S.K. Potikar. This was removed from the class 9 Hindi textbook, and it presents a very secular understanding of the country. They talked about how it had this really beautiful friendship between the Hindu and Muslim characters in the story. And if you look at this screenshot of Hamid Khan, it was there in the textbook in 2020-21, so it's only now been removed through this rationalization process. And I've put this screenshot here because if you go onto the NCERT website, you can actually have a list, you can actually see a list of rationalized content. This is only for the last, say, 1 or 2 years, the chapters that have been removed. You can actually go and the list looks like this on the right. It will say each textbook's name and what chapters have been removed, pages have been removed. But again, this is a very recent kind of a process, and it's all actually available on the NCERT website. Some of the other texts that were removed through this rationalization were the story Kamchor, which means Sherpa, by Ismat Chughtai. This was removed from the class 8 Hindi textbook. And when I was actually sort of analyzing and looking at all the textbooks that I was reading, the Hindi textbooks, I saw that after they removed Chughtai, actually Rahim remained as one of the only Muslim authors in the textbook, apart from maybe Kabir, which is a contested sort of a thing. But that became quite prominent. And then there was Viplav Gayan, which is a poem which translates to A Song of Rebellion by Balkrishna Sharma Naveen, which was removed from the class 7 textbook. And it's a song that incites rebellion and anarchy. And then there's a text by Krishan Chandar called Jamun Ka Ped, or the Jamun Tree, which is a satire on the inefficiency and insensitivity of the Indian bureaucracy. This was removed from the ICSE textbook. Of course, unity and diversity is sort of in a very tokenistic manner is a very important theme in the language textbooks. But I also wanted to see, so it's not just which chapters we keep and remove, but I also found it interesting how they order chapters in the textbooks, how they structure it. So there was only one chapter that talks about a non-Hindu festival in the textbook, which was about Eid. This is a story by Premchand Kaur. Okay, this is a story by Premchand called Eidgah, and this comes right after another poem by Subhadra Kumari Chauhan called Khilone Wala, which is toy seller, where there's a boy who's imagining himself as Lord Ram and how he wants to buy a sword and destroy evil. So the chapter comes right after. So I found that combination of the chapters very interesting and how they place this chapter, which I found there to be a subtle messaging in this order of chapters. I don't have that much time, so I wanted to go briefly into the history of the Hindi textbook and how in the early 1900s, Lieutenant Governor Harcourt Butler talked about how his textbook committee was under the influence of the ultra-Hindu section, who are now writing primary textbooks in Sanskritized Hindi, which people cannot understand. And I want to say how since then until today, this kind of Sanskritized Hindi remains in the language textbooks. So I'm just going to quickly actually skip this. Just to say that Sanskritized Hindi did become a symbol of national integration during the independence movement. So even today, I'll just read out one line, the first line from this chapter, Mithai Wala, which is the sweets man, which is still in the textbook, class 6. It says, Uske स्नेहाभिषिक्त कंठ से फूटा हुआ गान सुनकर निकट के मकानों में हलचल मच जाती. So it's really to say that he was singing a song and people were excited by it, but it's a very sort of convoluted, very Sanskritized kind of language. Even the next line, I'll move on right now. That's Mithai Wala. And what I wanted to say was that it really contributes to building a very strong religious Hindu, associating strong religious Hindu identity with the language. Krishna Kumar has talked about how Hindi textbooks have always in the past built a religio-cultural consciousness, and language teaching has been seen as spreading that consciousness. But the current iterations of the textbooks also sort of prove that. I'll quickly go over some other texts. So even till today, when I was talking about what remains, there's at least 2 or 3 chapters which are taken from ancient Hindu texts like the Ramayana or texts in Awadhi or Brajbhasha in praise of Lord Krishna, Lord Ram. And you see, I won't go into detail, but there's a chapter on Ram and Sita here in Awadhi language, which would be very alien to students who are reading them in class 6. There's another chapter by Mirabai in praise of Krishna called Bor or Barka. And then there is the final one called Sudama Charit by Narottam Das, which again talks about the generosity of Krishna. And this is not the only one. There's many more. There's many more chapters which are old classical Hindi and talk about Hindu gods and deities. So I just sort of wrap this up by saying that it's not only alienating to read these textbooks for a heterogeneous body of students because of its religious associations, but also because of the unfamiliarity of the language that's used in text. It's not close to the contemporary Hindi language that students would speak, and it sort of further alienates them from the language. And other themes that strongly sort of show up in these textbooks are unity and diversity, like I said, or patriotic poems about freedom fighters, ideas of nationalism. So language textbooks really do play a huge role in creating a sense of identity and contributing to language socialization in schools. And the question is, what are students being socialized into through language textbook? Is it more than teaching just the language? And it's important to look at who is included and excluded from the narrative in these language textbooks, especially when you think of the fact that this textbook is created for a linguistically, culturally, socioeconomically, and religiously heterogeneous student body. So the question that I'm ending with is what socialization looks like in the future, especially within the language classrooms, if the textbooks sort of continue to go in this direction. I'll wrap up with that. Thank you so much for listening. Should we come on stage? You can come and sit in mine.
Well done. Thank you again for giving me this opportunity to share, but also to read your brilliant papers. And also it has expanded my thoughts and my horizon of knowledge as well. So what we're going to do is I'm going to give you a very brief summary of my thoughts when I read the papers and a very synthesized sort of key themes emerging from me, may not be for you. And a few questions, very short questions. Before that, I want to really congratulate you for the brilliant papers and the brilliant work you're doing, and making me also think about what I should do next. So thank you for that. In terms of the themes from this particular panel on language and politics, I see the presenter show very clearly how language is used as a tool for political purposes, such as promoting unity, constructing national identity, marginalization of certain linguistic groups. That was first theme for me. Second was the implications of language, choices and policies on linguistic diversity, culture, heritage, social exclusion, and gender equality. The third theme appeared very clearly for me was the theme to explore the role of education or language in education spaces and how it creates tensions and contentions and how it brings different nuances. The fourth theme was about raises several questions on approaches to teaching linguistic diversity and social cohesion in South Asia, especially particularly in India. My work is more around teachers. Lastly, how well you brought your positionality into your papers and how you brought your positionality to also talk about the analysis you're doing. So I was very passionate to hear about your experiences as well. The first paper on vernaculars, so I thought it was very, very interesting about the understanding of the impact of education on vernacular languages. I'm not going to go too much in the summary of it, but I do have a few questions, very brief questions. Yeah, so why do some schools that previously used vernacular languages as their medium of instruction switch to English? That's the first question. Second is, are there any successful cases that have aimed to preserve or promote vernacular languages in the space of endangerment as well? Moving on to Manisha on gender sensitization. I really loved reading your paper. It was very interesting. So thank you. I do have 3 questions, but I'll ask 2. Did you come across any particular example of gender stereotypes in teaching materials or how teachers actually dealt with those from curriculum? And what about the use of gender neutral language in classroom or in the school built environment? Did you come across that in your work? Moving on to you, Moini, again, very interesting. I spent a lot of time in my career looking at history textbooks. So when I looked at your work, I was like, okay, that's good. And curriculum, and you're looking at a race curriculum. So again, well done on that. I have 2 questions because I didn't see your presentations, but those still remain. The first question about the implication of this gatekeeping for students' access to knowledge, especially around language. Second, in what ways do language textbooks differ from the history textbook? Because my work is mainly around how textbooks, the history textbook depict only the other or how it creates the otherism. The last question that appeared from your presentation is around, is any removal or erasure around the casteism? Like there was a lot of debate around that. So did you come across that? Before they answer, can we collect all questions? Would that be okay? Do the audience have any questions for our brilliant presenters?
My first question is for Manisha. So I guess I've also dealt with Butler's work, but in a different context. And one thing that I often think about when they're sort of specifically making that claim about what moment a person becomes, right? Or that moment of realization. is it so much in the address, or does that address then force us to think about their entire sort of like the sort of patterns in which their like sort of like sociality and emotionality are encoded, right? And I guess when we think about that more broadly, it just forces us to think about the particular power structures in which gender or gender, the gender address is configured. And I guess that my discomfort with any kind of cosmetic change is that we're not really asking how we relate to each other beyond the address, right? The last part, your discomfort. So I guess my discomfort is that we don't really think about how we, like the school or that, like, you know, the university, wherever you are, is as like, you know, it's really deeply implicated, as we saw in the course of today, reproducing so many, like, you know, sort of axes of I don't know, marginality. It like I guess this then segues into my question for Mohini, which is I about the single national curriculum, and that's like Pakistan's like version of like sort of dealing with or sort of reproducing and sort of even configuring and like inventing a particular version of sociality again, right? For this, like for people who exist within the state. And I wonder what, like you said, you wanted to draw that distinction between history textbooks, language textbooks, and different texts, and language is also a space in which respectabilities are then produced, right? And which like sort of mediate the way power determines how we like sort of feel about ourselves. So would you perhaps be able to elaborate on what, like you said that you're not going to get to like how teachers or your interviews with teachers, but I would actually really want to like think about what teachers do and what they believe and say. It even came up, I think, in Soham's like presentation on caste, and I think that's something I'm deeply interested in, because how does that then mediate what students end up believing or fearing, or even how they see themselves both as a site of possibility and paucity? So yeah.
Hi, there's one question online for Manisha from Joita. So when Manisha talks about gender identity, I would like to ask her how schools can help to erase negative names of the girl child who are nicknamed as unwanted from their birth by their family members. Want me to repeat the question? Yeah. So when you talk about gender identity, I would like to ask how schools can help to erase negative names of a girl child who are nicknamed unwanted from their birth by their family members. This is like a practice in certain areas of India where girls are named as unwanted when they are admitted into school. So how can schools take up measures?
Are there any other questions? I think we have another question.
There's a question.
I had a question for Manisha as well, and that was whether the order precludes the possibilities of teaching. Yeah, so I wanted to ask whether the order precludes the possibility of teachers communicating with their students as to what their preferred pronouns are. And
What is this?
as to whether it like enforces the title teacher, or whether teachers can express their preference for pronouns within the classroom itself. Like if a teacher wants to be referred to as ma'am, sir, yes, whatever.
Presenters to go one by one.
Okay, so I will start with like the question I got from you. So one thing that I saw when I did this as a basic interpretative research initially, and then I started going around schools in Tamil Nadu. So like now my understanding is a little bit more based on the Tamil Nadu state. One thing I did notice is that there was a huge social currency value that was placed on English language, right? So what happened was a lot of even government schools sort of segregated into English medium and Tamil medium, and those from the better off but still so like lower socioeconomic background went to the English medium schools, and those who were much worse off than the ones who were going to English medium were going to the Tamil medium school, right? So what happened is slowly there was a requirement and there was a push towards wanting more English medium schools, because it's not just about opportunities, but it's also about an higher social currency that both the parents and like even the teachers who are working within the schools are able to kind of work off of. But the bigger question remained: are they trained in to teaching this like language medium? Not necessarily. And a lot of times, I think previously there was somebody who was mentioning about rote learning within English as a language medium, and that is a huge issue within a lot of rural communities in Tamil Nadu as a state. And you see a lot of kids who actually graduate from their high schools and then they go into universities and they're struggling to kind of, even be able to put together their ideology properly, both in Tamil or in English, because they haven't been taught both the languages, right? So I think because there is this push towards English medium, there is also this othering of other languages that are not particularly English. But then there is teaching of national languages, at least within like multiple states. But that also doesn't occur when it comes to vernacular languages. As for your second question, one thing that I did notice was when I visited, so one of my friends is a person who's from Badaga community, right? And Badaga is a language that is endangered. But as a community, they're actually working towards at least ensuring that their children can speak that language well. And even if they move out of the community and into urban spaces, they are consistently told about like their history. But there is also a dissociation of the identity that comes as a tribal person, because when I speak to people who move to urban areas, they don't want to be associated to a tribal community. And they don't want to further talk about it to their peers, nor do they want to, tell their child about it. So there's a little bit of an internalized shame that comes along with that identity of theirs, especially those who move to urban spaces. So I think it kind of depends on, and now there is conversation on like language and protection of one's history and getting reclaiming that identity. So I think it now depends on the next generation and to see how they kind of react towards it. And yeah, I would like to know more about that as well.
Your first question is about gender stereotypes in the material, right? A lot of material I feel has been replaced lately, and my sisters, basically my niece, so from that experience, I understand that they're trying to be more inclusive. And so when I was studying, there was that was in college for my undergraduate degree. There was a chapter on how a widow was reclaiming her sexuality. And when it was in my first year, when I went to the second year and the new students joined, the chapter was gone, as Mohini's presentation is about. So I think we are getting a little better than that, because there is a certain resistance that's also portrayed in the material now. So if a girl child is asked to marry when she's young, there's a certain resistance that's depicted as in the form of stories. I have not looked in depth into materials, but this is from my teaching experience. So I've seen certain stories of resistance that are also portrayed. So I think there is an effort being made. And that is true with regard to the next question also, gender neutral language in school environments. When it's going through handbooks, there was a marked difference between handbooks of private schools and government schools. The government is trying to make an effort, but I don't think they have it figured out. Because instead of saying girls should wear this, boys should wear this, all students should wear their uniforms, is how it goes. But they have not figured out how to state those instructions. in an inclusive manner. But now they have introduced gender neutral uniforms in some schools. And yeah, but nonetheless, all that effort is being made. You were asking about the environment in the school. So from the articles I have read, I understand that it is still pretty much the same, because the teachers have not particularly warmed up to the whole identity being expressed in whichever way one prefers. And apparently there is a lot of shaming for dressing in a manner that is not appropriate for a woman or a man. So that is what I understand. Okay. Okay, it was your question. I think interpellation is also about creating marginality. So how you are interpellated in that moment of being addressed. So if that address fails, or if you are addressed again as if in regard to my presentation, if I am addressed by something I'm not, again a certain marginality is created, right? So I feel that it works both ways, and also the resistance is also embedded in that performance, is what Butler says. So I feel that it is a matter of how one wants to be addressed. So the next question also that was asked to me, how the unwanted girl child can be rescued by the school and made to feel worthy. I think again it is a matter of interpellation. The interpellation as unwanted can only be reclaimed by interpellation as worthy. And I think it works both ways in creating marginality and also erasing it. Maybe it shouldn't, but I think that is how we as social beings function. I don't know if that answers your question. And regarding the order is very interesting. They say that teachers should no longer be addressed as sir or ma'am, but only using the gender neutral term teacher. But following that is given is a very idealistic and conventional idea of a teacher, and they claim that the teacher is very close to the student and is a caretaker of the student. So sir and ma'am creates that power hierarchy and distances the teacher from the students. But teacher, on the other hand, as far as the order is concerned, or the way they see it, brings them closer, the student and the teacher closer, and eliminates that hierarchy, power hierarchy. So it is a little idealistic. They have not really thought about pronouns. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So I just wanted to sort of clarify by saying that my research is actually looking at language pedagogies, and I'm looking at how classrooms reproduce language hierarchies and language ideology. This was an incidental discovery while I was working on the textbook chapter, because because it's also just happened, the rationalization. I ended up looking at what was removed and I started finding some patterns. So I just wanted to share this sort of little bit that sort of came out incidentally from my research. So I haven't gone deep into erased curriculum, but I like Pune was asking about teachers and their views. So that's something that I'm really interested in, and how the textbooks, first of all, what they include in the textbooks, what are the kind of narratives that are included in the textbook, and how they're conveyed to students in the classroom, especially at the upper primary level. And what I found was that I'm also interested in ideas of shame. So I think, again, Juno, you talked about ideas of shame associated with language. I'm also interested in seeing how those come into the language classroom, and how teachers communicate the teaching of Hindi versus either the teaching of English. How do they include other languages? So the NEP, for example, talks about using students' multilingualism as a resource and strategy, but are they really doing that in the classrooms, or how are they utilizing that? So I also tried to look at that. I did classroom observations, and in that I did find, and when I interviewed teachers, I found they had certain views about Hindi, for example. A lot of them believed that Hindi was the national language of the country, first of all, which it's not. And they were very proud of the language. They were very sort of they had certain ideas about the language. So I was also interested in looking at this dual position of Hindi as something that is being politically pushed as a national language. It has been for many years, but especially right now. And at the same time, when you look at its status in a city like New Delhi, in a sort of very urban metropolitan kind of space, in terms of social capital or in terms of economic capital, it loses out to English. And those ideas get communicated to students at a very early age. So I was more interested in looking at that. But what I wanted to say was that, as you see, you also asked about what kind of gatekeeping goes on, or even ideas of caste and how it comes up in language textbooks. So I think there's something very convenient that goes on with language textbooks where they say that it's not the history or civics textbook. So you can stay away from certain topics, but at the same time, it is used as a space to just sort of make some things very normal, or just promote some ideas within that space. And I think why it's different from studying history textbooks is because history sort of, those textbooks explicitly are saying they're doing a certain thing, they're explicitly talking about a certain idea of the nation. But language textbooks are, their stated objective is to teach language, grammar. And I'm also in my research doing a comparison with Wales and their language model because of their sort of revitalization project. And I found that their textbooks sort of focus on very everyday themes for children. They're looking at, I don't know, birthday parties, pets. So the chapters in those language textbooks sort of surround very, very daily, mundane kind of things for children. And they become, it becomes a very different process of then engaging with the language, as opposed to the very deliberate inclusion of certain chapters in Hindi textbooks, whether it's, looking at unity and diversity, or ideas of nationalism, or a certain kind of, like I said, religious, cultural consciousness. So it was those differences also then make it more prominent in terms of what the Hindi textbook is doing in particular, and why the Hindi textbook is also because of the sort of connection with the government, the past connection with it being a symbol that was used to kind of rebel against colonialism, or English, the language. So there's all of those, that it's very complicated, all those politics that come into it. But yeah, I don't know if this answers any question at all, but that's really where my research is coming.
Very much. Thank you, everyone. Can we just have applause for all of them? Very much. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for going with the times. Thank you for being patient.
We're actually perfectly on time, so we're not over time at all. It's all good. Yeah, no, it's all fine. So I'm just going to wrap up this conference now and just say a huge thank you to all of you, first of all, for being here and staying on through the day. Some of you have been here since the morning and engaged with questions, with thoughts. So thank you so much. It's been a very special day. We've been planning this for many months, and it's really special that it's sort of culminated in this day today. I also especially want to thank our four partners actually. INDOX, the India Oxford Initiative. Where is Marva? Is she here? Okay, well, she's not here, but she's been a huge support from the start. There's Vinita from the Oxford India Center for Sustainable Development. Really, again, thank you so much for supporting this conference, supporting the idea. It's really because of both of you that we could be here. Of course, University of Oxford and University College London for supporting us and partnering with us. This topic meant a lot to us, and when we put the topic out for with a call for abstracts, there was so many abstracts that came in from around the world. So we actually extended the number of projects we could include in today's conference. But all of you have flown in from different parts of the world, so we're really, really grateful for that. There's some of you from Cambridge, from Edinburgh, from Washington, DC in the US. There's Delhi, Bangalore, Hyderabad. So you've come from all over the world, so we're really, really grateful that you could be here with us today. I also want to thank our chairs, Dr. Kusha Anand, Suraj, Abhishek, and Professor Kier, who had chaired the first panel. Thank you so much for chairing the panels, sharing your thoughts, making the discussion so nuanced, and adding so much value to the discussions, to the topics, and giving your feedback to the presenter. I'm sure they really value it. I also want to thank our volunteers for today, who really helped the program run very smoothly. There's Neeraj, who's been working on the sort of hybrid part of fun. You're just the only one who got an applause. But thank you for making this happen. Vinita and Abhishek and Marva have been constantly at it and helping us live. run the program smoothly. There was Richie from City Audio Visuals, who's at the back end and making sure that we don't have many disasters. We had a disastrous morning, but he rescued us from that. We had our caterers who helped us with tea, coffee, lunch, and of course, my co-convener, Uma Pradhan, Dr. Uma Pradhan. Thank you so much for making this happen. You've been an inspiration to me, to a lot of us here. Thank you. Thank you for doing this and just making this process of working together very smooth. And that brings me to the end of the thank yous. Please join us for the closing drinks reception. It's again in the seminar room 1 downstairs. I also want to thank the online participants. Thank you for all your brilliant questions. It's been really great to have you. We were live streaming this event, so a recording of the entire event is going to be available on YouTube. So if you'd like to revisit the conversations or share them with anyone who may have missed the conference, please feel free to do that. Our channel is called Education South Asia. You can follow Education South Asia on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. We post quite regularly. We keep doing events. We have seminars. We have a reading group that runs regularly in Oxford. So join us, and we also have a mailing list, and we'll keep you updated about our upcoming events. And like we said, we've also launched a new website. It's educationsouthAsia.com. So you'll get updates on that as well. I think that's about it. Thank you so much. And I hope we'll catch up with some of you at the reception downstairs. Thank you for being with us.